bookaholics, and welcome back to another reading vlog. This reading vlog is another one of my spoiler reading vlogs in which I am going to be going through the last book in my Orbit Recommends series I have been doing, and that is For Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell. I'm sure you're tired of me telling this story, but I picked up the first book, Winter's Orbit, and then decided that I would just be doing a standalone book each month throughout the summer as a buddy read. I had no further intentions than just having it as a buddy read over on my Discord. I ended up having so many thoughts about Winter's Orbit that I thought I would spoiler vlog the experience and then I could just share it with you guys. Then I picked up the second book, which was Terraformers, and at the end of Terraformers was the Orbit Recommends section. At the end of every Orbit book you get a if you enjoyed this, try this section, and at the end of Terraformers was Some Desperate Glory, which is one of the books that I had intended to read. Then I decided that I would also evaluate how well Orbit recommends books. So I read Terraformers, then I read Some Desperate Glory, and now the last one, because of the end of Some Desperate Glory, Orbit recommended Ocean's Echo. So not only am I bookending this series of vlogs with the two books from this series, starting with Winter's Orbit and ending with Ocean's Echo, but I'm also hoping to see if I genuinely agree with these recommendations. This one we have is the second book that is set in this world. They're completely separate stories. You do not need to read them in order. They just happen to be set in the same world. And in this story, we are following two protagonists. The first one being Tanal, who is the son of a politician. He is assigned to join the military after one problem too many. He is commissioned to sync or synchronize with this lieutenant. Basically, we have where Tanal is a mind reader. The lieutenant, who is Surit, our other protagonist, who can control mind readers. And they don't like the idea of having a liability mind reader just roaming around, hence why this is supposed to happen. And we have it where Surit is the son of a disgraced general, and that is why he is in a position where it would be very difficult for him to refuse this sync, though neither of them want it. And we are following the story of the two. I'm very excited to get into this one. I do really enjoy Everina Maxwell's writing style. I really enjoyed Winter's Orbit, so I have high expectations for this one. This is going to be split into spoilery sections. The book is thankfully already in parts, so each part I will jump in and give some spoilery thoughts. So we're going to go for obviously part one, and then I will only talk about spoilers for part one, part two, etc, etc. So if you would like to read along with me, the timestamps are down below. If you've already read the book and just want my thoughts, then proceed at will. But that is what I'm hoping to accomplish with this, is we can read along and chat together as we go. Without further ado, let's get into part one. Hey vlog, so I have now finished part one of Ocean's Echo, and this book is very much setting up in a similar dynamic to what we have in the first book, where it is about a power imbalance and an unwanted alliance between two people who are thrust into this position. So it's clearly a topic that this author very much likes discussing. Another huge emphasis on consent, as we had in the first book, which again is just something that I really, really love. In this first part, we have Tanal, who is a rich socialite, as I said in the description. He is the son of one of the more important legislators within this planet, and he is basically a deadbeat by his family's standards. He is a reader, which means that he is able to read people's minds, which I always love when we have a somewhat fantasy element going on within a sci-fi. Again, something that also we had in the first book, where there were elements that still felt very much like fantasy, even though it was a sci-fi setting. In this one, we have our magic-ish system where we have a reader and he can read minds, and it's something that's commonplace in this world, and basically they are quite heavily looked into for obvious reasons, and that you can kind of understand. You'd understand why you wouldn't want people that can just read minds wandering about the place. While at the same time within this, we have it where, because he is part of this prominent family, it's an embarrassment almost that he has this skill, and he is on the outskirts and the dodgy end of this planet, wanting to try and probably work for a mob boss because it's somewhere he knows he can get money for his skills. He then gets arrested, and basically in this world, if you're a reader, if you don't do anything illegal, then they kind of can't touch you. But if you do something illegal, then they can arrest you, and then they can throw you in the military, and then you get what's called synced, which means that they find someone who can control minds and they can sync the two of you together, and then the person that is the writer can command the person that is the reader. So he gets arrested and he gets taken to his aunt, and his aunt's had enough of him, so she's told him that he's going to get synced, and they're going to sync him against his will, which is not legal. So that is where his first interaction with Surit happens. Surit is a soldier in this army, and he wants to make captain because his father was disgraced from the army. He was dishonorably discharged, and that means that his mother now cannot receive her pension. So he wants to make captain because if he makes captain, he can reinstate her pension. So we are in a very tenuous situation where the army is saying, well, you have to sync with this guy or we're going to fire you because you're not doing your job, because you're disobeying a direct order. But at the same time, they're committing a crime because they're illegally trying to force the sync. So it's been a very interesting conversation around military power, around corruption, around what is or isn't legal, and how that completely varies from person to person and what they deem they should be able to get away with. Now, the interactions between the two started out as hostile for obvious reasons, and then eventually progressed into them forming an alliance that means that they are going to fake their sinking so that then once they get off of this ship, because this ship is going to be on like a journey into deep space, so once they get off the ship, they can then go their separate ways, because once they sink, it's sink for life, and they don't want that. So we have Surit and Tanal, who are now in this position where they are going to pretend and they're going to act like they're synced so that one doesn't get court-martialed and therefore lose any chance he has of restoring his mother's pension, and the other doesn't get basically forced to sync with someone else, because just because Surit says no doesn't mean they won't find an alternative. So it's been a very interesting first portion. Let's go through my notes. We have the description of the way that Tanal is a mess and his reasons behind being a mess at the beginning of the story were really well done, because he is someone who obviously is despised by his family, but also equally importantly, someone who is in a society where he has these skills that he was born with, he has no say on, but that then no one trusts him because he can read minds. So it's normal that it would mess with someone's psyche. And I think that the way that it was shown as him being a mess, and it's clearly something that's come on over time, it feels like the character has existed prior to the book, and I always love when authors are capable of doing that. Tanal's relationship with his sister is also very interesting. She's very law-abiding, she's done everything right, she's gone through uni, she's also very, very interested in the law. She's read up a lot on what his rights are and what is or isn't legal, because she, I guess, knows that eventually he's going to need that knowledge. So it shows that she cares deeply for him, but in her own way, and on the hope that eventually he'll go on the straight and narrow. Surit's history of why he entered into the military is also fascinating, because to me, a lot of the time we just get characters that go into the military because they want to be a hero, and then things go wrong. This guy already felt disenfranchised from the military. He has no love for the military. He is doing it for a purpose, and that's why he is the best soldier, because he already knew what he was signing up for. Normally you have these guys that come in, they want to be heroes, and then when they don't get to be the biggest cheese on campus from the get-go, they feel disenfranchised. He already knew that going in, which has made him want to thrive, not because he wants to be this big badass hero, but because he knows he needs to climb the ranks so that he can literally reinstate his mother's pension. So his motivations are very realistic, and I really did appreciate that, but it also then would make you understand why he would be okay being in this position of faking with Tanal. The officers not seeing that Surit was a terrible choice for this was also fascinating, because the reason that he is the ideal candidate is also the reason he's the worst candidate, because he's the most law-abiding, he's the best behaved candidate, he's the one that's always done as he's told, but he has always done everything within the confines of what is legal and what is ethical and what is moral. He's not going to blindly follow the order to sync with someone against their will, because he's so law-abiding. So you almost would have needed someone who was a bit more deviant or just a little bit less law-abiding to be the one to sync with Tanal. The emphasis on consent, as I said, is a huge thing throughout the story so far, and I really love the angle at which we are approaching it as well, because it's consenting to basically hand over your mind to someone, your will to someone, and I'm really excited to see how that develops throughout the story. The conversation that they had, in which they basically basically decided that they were going to pretend to sink was a brilliant groundwork for this relationship, because you have it where Tanal is talking about how he might as well. They're gonna sink him with someone, he might as well. And Surit being like, there is nothing you can say to me that will make me want to sink with you. I know that your consent is forced. You saying yes does not mean that you're actually consenting, which was an incredibly important conversation around consent, because feeling trapped or pressured into doing something is not actually consent, and therefore, for example, in the real world technically doesn't hold up in a court of law. So under duress, it's what it's called, I believe, and yes, it doesn't count as consent. So Surit's saying, like, there at this point where we are at, there is nothing you can say that will make me sink with you, because nothing about it is consensual. On the flip side, you have Tanal being like, well, you can't say no, because then they will court-martial you. You have nothing then, and you have no money, your mother will have no money, you're screwing over your whole family just for my sake. And that's where they both kind of come to the agreement of like, well, neither of us want to be in the situation, so neither of us should be, so let's fake it. And I think the way that that was brought about was really, really well handled. So far, very, very interesting story. Cannot wait to continue. I tried to read this a few weeks back and I was really struggling with it, with the concentration. And this time I've just sunk right into it. So it clearly was a mood thing, because I am really loving this and I do really enjoy Everina Maxwell's writing style. So on to the next part. I will hopefully check in once I am done with that. But excellent start to the book. I have now read part 2 of Ocean's Echo, and that means that I have some thoughts. First of all, this part was an interesting one, because I feel like all of the world building stuff and all of the pretext for all of the characters was set up in part 1. Part 2 is now actually putting the pieces on the board and putting them in place for there to actually become more of a plot than just these two are faking sinking. So it's an interesting concept, because it's almost like fake dating, but they're fake sinking instead, and they're pretending that they are synced up. And I don't know, it was an interesting play on that concept, and I did enjoy that. I do think that we do get to see both their similarities come more to light, but then also the way that they are potentially going to push back against each other because of their differences. I think that they see only their differences at the moment, and we as the readers are the ones that are seeing their similarities come to the forefront as well. So that's quite enjoyable. I do think that it's going to make for an interesting pairing later on. Throughout my tabs, I definitely suspect that because they're being sent on this junker mission, they need to go retrieve basically space junk. And it is from a ship that Surit's mum exploded, to the reason that she is disgraced. So I definitely think there's something fishy going on there. One, because someone of his ranking literally basically being a junk retrieval team is interesting, which means that either there's something out there in space that is of valuable importance and they want their best people on it, or they want him to be out there amongst it for a different reason. I don't really know, but there's definitely something fishy going on there. And then also we have it where the ship is now failing. That has enhanced my suspicion that something is afoot, and it's not just we're sending you out on this mission for whatever reason. It is like there's definitely some kind of conspiracy going on. Whether it involves Tanal or Tanal's just a byproduct of it, I don't know yet, but I am curious. I'm also very curious to see why Surit's mum did destroy the ship to begin with. Like, I'm curious to see why that is something that happened. So we'll see how that goes and how much information we manage to get from that, because obviously I'm already quite a decent ways in and nothing really has happened yet, in a way. I don't think this is going to be the most plot heavy book, so I'm very curious to see how much information we do end up getting, especially with the next bit being a very chunky portion. The scene in which they convinced the captain that they are synced was also quite entertaining, because you had to have it where they had to play their part and then they had to not be surprised at what the other person is doing, because they have to make it look like they're doing it to the other person. And I did enjoy that as well, because like, not only are you faking doing something, you have to fake that you know what the other person is going to do predictably, which could have done with some rehearsing, let's be honest, boys. Tanal did try and initiate sex with Surit, and I thought that was an interesting scene. It highlighted an awful lot about these characters, about the way that they think, the way they feel. Clear attraction between them was very cool as well, the way that they feel about each other. It's just that obviously one of them does have scruples about the consent issues, one about the lack of consent that was brought into the fray with the sinking, learning, then the lack of consent and him being forced into the military, the difference in rank. I do think that all of that was brought to the forefront, and it is interesting because you have Tanal saying that he consents to all of those things with Surit, but Surit still understands the way power imbalance works, and I did really appreciate that. So I really like the way that we discuss consent in all of Everina Maxwell's books. Yeah, the only other thing that I really have to comment on is that I'm really enjoying watching Tanal learn to pilot. Now, the people that are training him, I have suspicions of, I'm not gonna lie. They are both very sus to me. Even though one of them seems really sweet and one of them seems a bit of an asshole, I suspect both of them. So that's an interesting one. But having them training him so that then he's like learning a skill is really interesting, because I definitely don't think of Tanal as someone who would normally put in much effort for learning something. So it's going to be very curious to see if he actually does end up acquiring some skills and how that will make him feel about himself psychologically, because I know that Everina Maxwell likes to dive into the psychology of her characters. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to pan out. But those are my thoughts on this part. It was a very short part, so I don't have a huge amount to say, but I am now going to go on to the next part, which I believe is the chunkiest of all of the different parts anyway. And I feel like this is where a load is going to happen. So on to part 3, we shall go. Hey vlog, so I have now read part 3 of Ocean's Echo, so I thought I would check in. I appreciate that this is not ideal lighting, but we're working with what we're working with. This part was definitely where the politics really began to amp up. The relevance of who Tanal is related to actually mattered, and also equally importantly who Surit was related to. So we have here the part where we've actually gone into deep space, like their mission was intended to be, and they get apprehended for being within their territory. And we have it where we are now discovering that Surit's mother was trying to protect readers. We have it where this governor is very clearly someone who is not to be trusted, and it's where the politics are beginning to come into play. The governor is trying very much to recruit Tanal to be able to have somewhat of a fuck you to his auntie, and that was an interesting conversation in and of itself. I had an interesting time with this part. I think that I would have liked there to be a little bit more emotional connection between Surit and Tanal before we got to this point, because there are definitely some parts where we have Tanal being concerned for Surit, because as a reader, someone who's forced into this supposed thinking that hasn't actually happened, the people of this place where there are a lot of readers and they have a lot more rights are really appalled by it. Is how they're going to potentially then treat Surit, who has forcibly forced himself into this situation of syncing with Tanal. So it's a very interesting outlook on people's rights and what Surit should have considered, and all this beating himself up palaver that we get. But so you have it where Tanal then recruits Surit as part of this team. So Tanal gets given a team of people to work with within this government because she wants to recruit Tanal because she hates his aunt, and she thinks he hates his aunt because of what was done to him. He then recruits Surit as part of his team, pretending that because they're supposedly synced, it's hard for him to be away from Surit, like it causes him physical pain, which was interesting that was kind of a thing. I thought that might come up or something like it, so that they would continue to be forced together. But I would have liked it if we had established some emotional stakes. Like, I appreciate that they admire each other, they respect each other, and they've come to appreciate each other because they're dependent on one another for their own futures and for their own sakes, and they clearly are attracted to each other. I just really would have liked for them to be more aware of their connection with each other emotionally, for any of it to have felt any more impactful. I think that at this point, the lack of communication between each other, the lack of emotional impact they would have on each other and not being aware of it. So they're each worried about the other, but they think that they're the ones that care and the other doesn't. Over and over again, it's just not quite working for me. The miscommunication in the first book, in Winter's Orbit, worked because there were two people who were forced into a marriage. So the emotional tension was there from kind of the get-go. With this one, they're two people who are forced into a working relationship of a really toxic nature, and that's how they're treating one another, even though they clearly care about each other. But I am not actually fully aware of how much they care about each other. I know they, again, admire each other, they respect each other, and they care about the other's well-being, but I genuinely have no idea how much they care about each other aside from that. And I think having established a bit more of of romantic inclination would have enhanced the tension and made some of those scenes feel quite dramatic and exciting. But other than that, I'm really enjoying it. As for notes, I really did enjoy watching Tanal play politics because that's his sphere. He is a socialite. So he is always very good at playing socially with the situation, with his cockiness and his confidence. It was really good to see Tanal in this element because obviously we see a bit of that in the beginning before he gets apprehended, but it's him when he's like on drugs and he's not doing too good. So then seeing it from a perspective where, you know, he's doing it for survival's sake and therefore he's really invested in it and he's bringing it his all. It was fantastic to see Tanal shine instead of be the one that's like a little bit of a fuck up, which was great. The way that they've begun working together and like Surit's knowledge of like legalities and what is or isn't legal within the army, and then Tanal knowing what is and isn't socially appropriate and what is or isn't allowed within the politicking sphere was really interesting because they were each bringing their strengths forward, and that was a really good relationship for the two to be in when it came to working together towards a common goal, which was very cool. Again, finding out that Surit's mother was trying to liberate the readers and was probably killed for it, and trying to protect readers was also interesting because obviously Surit being an architect, i.e. he can write readers, he can control people, he still is someone who would never abuse that power, so it's clear that's been instilled from his parent who very much cared about readers, which is interesting as well. We do get a slight investigation-ish kind of bit going on, similar to in Winter's Orbit, where it's like a political intrigue kind of investigation happening about what has actually gone on in this government structure for it to have been so easily upheavaled by this new governor, who initially seems quite charismatic and everyone seems to like, but then we kind of start to see a bit of the underbelly of it, and the way that they've garnered control and power was really interesting. The whole idea of like them constantly leaning into the sinking, the fact they bring it up frequently, the fact that there is a lot of conversations around, you know, like them playing into the idea that they can't be separated as a way to keep each other safe was interesting because obviously it's then emphasizing how synced they are. And you're around a lot of people who can read minds, just them constantly upping that because they need it for survival while fully knowing that they're adding wood to the fire. I like the way that that created tension and intrigue. One thing that I didn't expect to care about, and that I didn't care about until it got brought back into the fray, is that when we're reunited with the crew, so they were separated from their crew, and there were a couple of characters in the previous part, in part 2, had been introduced as their crew, and they were interesting characters, but they weren't ones that I felt particularly strongly about. So it was very interesting to me to suddenly be happy to see them again. I don't know if it was just a familiar face or just people that you knew you could at least somewhat depend upon. I don't know. But like after having been through all of this political intrigue and manipulation, just being around people who, yeah, they might not be the best people, but at least they're openly shitty instead of doing the whole two-faced thing, was quite exciting. So there are my thoughts for part 3. We're now going to move on to part 4, which is going to, I believe, the shortest part, and I suspect this is just maybe getting back to where they're from, and then the last part will be kind of, I think, resolving everything. So I am excited to see if we get any kind of romantic evolution in this teeny tiny part, because I know that Everina Maxwell does just kind of come in all guns blazing when she does decide to add the romance in, so hopefully that will be the case. But yeah, on to part 4. We are nearly done. We are past the halfway mark, so hopefully we're going to actually start getting the romance in this romance story. Hey vlog, so I'm going to try and be as coherent as possible because although this is definitely the shortest part of the book, so many reveals happen in this part and I can't wait to get into the next part. So you might be getting 2 updates in one day today, I'm not going to lie. So I forgot to mention in the last part that they did actually sync eventually. But yeah, so the boys, they did sync up at the end of the last part. And now they're synced and they're spiraling. Like they don't know how to stop the two becoming one, like where one mind ends and the other begins, etc. We have that. So they are starting to spiral and it's kind of dangerous. And they are trying to go after medical equipment that was used to create the brainwashing that was being used in the other city that we were in the previous part. We're now going after trying to stop brainwashing, trying to stop Surit and Tanal from merging into one person. And we also need to stop the army from potentially interfering as well with Tanal and Surit. So we have it where they figure out that Surit and Tanal were kind of placed together because what happens is that if the merger goes poorly, then Surit will die and Tanal will take Surit's abilities. So it would stop him being a reader and it would make him become an architect, which is a much more acceptable thing in this society. So basically it turns out that that was Tanal's aunt's plan all along. She wanted to basically turn Tanal into an architect by merging him with Surit. Surit dying because Surit's a no one and he's the son of a disgraced general, so no one would care, and then Tanal could take on his abilities. So we also have a section here where Surit has had a command written into him by the evil governor person from the previous part, where he then begins to attack the rest of the crew, so they have to render him unconscious. So we're also tackling with that. While we're on our way to the lab, there's like this big proclamation that Tanal's aunt has been murdered by the person that we came to distrust in the previous part. We then have Tanal's sister come forth and be like, listen, I know you've seen pictures of my brother with the enemy, but I think it's under duress. Tanal, come home and we, disavow anyone who would be willing to hurt our family. So that's kind of put a bit of a bullseye on her head. And then on top of that, we now have it where Tanal arrives at this lab only to find out that his aunt is actually alive. So it was a very, very dramatic part. But I think my biggest takeaway from this whole section is that we did get a lot more intimacy between Tanal and Surit because their minds are merging. So they can't keep their thoughts private from one another so easily, which means that then their brains aren't separate, which means their feelings and thoughts aren't separate, and they're merging and they understand each other a little bit better. They're doing a lot of the self-sacrificing thing that happens in these kinds of books of, no, it should be me that dies, and it should be me that risks this. You can survive, I can't, all of that. All very romantic, a little bit too melodramatic. Again, I would like more emotional connection still. They're still trying to guard themselves against each other. Now, I understand it because they're trying to not let their brains fuse. So I get why they're trying to keep themselves apart and not reach each other's thoughts and that, but I really would have liked for there to be more intermingling of the minds. I do still really like it, and the way they care about each other and the way that they are seeing each other in another light and everything. I'm really excited to see the last part. So far, so good. Very exciting but very short part of the book. So hopefully the final part will be a very exciting and explosive ending, and I can get back to you very soon with my concluding thoughts. Hey vlog, I have now finished Ocean's Echo, so I thought I would come and jump in and give you my final thoughts, and then also my how does this compare to Some Desperate Glory. So starting off with my thoughts on the conclusion of the book. This is interesting because I genuinely thought that this book would have much more of a romantic component than it did. Given how romance heavy Winter's Orbit felt, I genuinely thought that that would be a much more central theme in here than it was. Now, while there was a building connection, and we do have, of course, the conclusion being a romantic one where the two are going to end up together, they're going to try working out their romance, working out their relationship, they're not synced, so it's not necessity, it is just that they are wanting to form some kind of life together. The romance is not hugely prevalent. You're just seeing the two characters have a bit of tension. So if you are someone who really likes slow burn romances and you're more about the pining than the actual resolution of the romance, I would highly recommend this because the romance doesn't actually even happen in the book. They kiss at the end of the book, they realize they love each other, then they think that it might be because they're synced, and then they still want to spend time with each other after that. So then you have it where they decide that they're going to try a relationship, but Tanal is going to have to leave for 6 months. So we don't actually see the relationship at all in the book. You just see the build up to it. So for all the people that are like, I actually like the build up more than the romance, this will do it for you. I'm big on like actually seeing a relationship progress and mean something. I quite like it when couples get together quite early and then we can see the romance unfold. That's just my personal preference. This didn't hold much sway in terms of the romance. In terms of the actual plot of the story, I think that this was really well executed. I think that we had some really interesting themes, especially around consent, around the politics, including, so throughout this we kind of realized that the readers and the architects were created. They were created using remnants, which is something that was featured in Winter's Orbit as well. They are these kind of stones, like these gem things that turn out to be possibly like some kind of like fossilized alien. They used to be able to create readers and architects, but originally readers and architects were in one person. People were both, and it was tearing people's minds apart, so they separated it. And then they started doing the syncing afterwards because there were too many readers to be able to control, and it was all about control. And I think that the statements around that, the idea that the themes around most of the things that we perceive as a threat in our society is actually made by our society. And I think that that's a really important way of going about it as well, because it's not that having readers isn't a threat to society. It's just that the people who are literally culpable of creating readers are now the ones condemning readers. And thematically, I think that that is something that you could take away and apply to our world. I'm not going to tell you how to analyze our current political situation, but it's something that you can take away with you and reapply where needed. The sci-fi elements to it were really cool, the intergalactic part of it, and then also we have it where at one point we have them going into someone's mind to try and free people who have been brainwashed and control the current climate, you know, undo the things that this person has done. And I think that that was a really interesting take as well, because it is them having to work together with their different abilities to bring forward a possible outcome, and then them being potentially held as like a court-martial, or whether or not they'll face consequences for literally saving the entire country. I always think that is fascinating when you talk about political corruption in that manner. And then eventually having Surik quit the army and want to be a civilian is also really good as well, and him eventually going to be working for the same people that Zin is working for. Zin really came through in this last part as well. She definitely was a lot more kick-ass. She knew her stuff when it came to the legal side of things, which is what she's always wanted to do. She's wanted to become a lawyer specifically so she can help readers. So it was always really good to have her involved in that, and the fact that Surik's now going to be working with her and helping her. Tanal has agreed to go with the Resolution, which is this group of beings who are kind of in charge of this galactic alliance that we have going in this world. So having him go with the Resolution so that they can look into exactly what a reader and exactly what an architect is, and then he'll be back in 6 months, and he thinks that he's going to go into politics because it's actually something that he excels at. It's just something that he has not wanted to partake in because of his abilities and because of his aunt. So an interesting conclusion where the characters somewhat find their purpose and wanting to make better lives for themselves than when they started out, which is fabulous. Does this actually feel like a sci-fi romance? Yes and no. Like I said, the sci-fi elements are really good, but it was mostly focused on the political side. The reader and architect thing, it's like X-Men. You could count X-Men technically as fantasy or sci-fi. It's the same here. Is that a fantastical element? Is it a sci-fi element because they have powers? You do have space travel. That's the sci-fi element. It's heavily political, but the politics literally could have been set on a future Earth and it would have been the same. And then we have the romance where, as I said, it's very slow burn and you don't really get a full conclusion to it. And then, so yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I've given it 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I would highly recommend. I personally liked Winter's Orbit more, but I still think this is a great book, and it's a fantastic continuation of books in this world. They are complete standalones. You don't need to have read anything at all from Winter's Orbit to understand this, but they do intertwine just in the sense of like the Resolution is in both of them and the Remnants are in both of them. That is literally it. Now, for the final part that we have to talk about is, does this actually work as a recommendation for fans of Some Desperate Glory? In the same way that it was yes and no with Some Desperate Glory as a recommendation for Terraformers. With Some Desperate Glory, if you liked the themes of Terraformers, you would be able to find enough overlap with Some Desperate Glory. With Some Desperate Glory, I think the thing that you could like about this is about people coming to understand their own society and to critique it. So you have someone who's in a shitty position, like here in Some Desperate Glory and like Tanal in Ocean's Echo, and you have it where they are people who are not in a good place who are then put in an even worse place from their family member, and then they have to figure out what exactly it is they want from life, what they believe is the best options for their society. You have it where they are repeatedly turned on their head when it comes to what they think is best. That I think has a lot of overlap. Tanal's a lot more charismatic than Kier is. Kier is very straight-laced. Kier, personality-wise, is more like Surit, but is if you put Surit in Tanal's position, you would have Kier. So there's enough overlap there that I can see it, but the writing style is incredibly different. This is entirely character focused. Now, it's got a mystery section going on, you've got the political section going on, you've got criticisms of the military, you've got all of these other things going on in here. The main thread, the main focus throughout the entire book is the characters. And while in Some Desperate Glory, the characters are definitely the ones that are pushing the plot, not the other way round, I definitely feel as though its center is mostly on its themes. It's not very emotive. Its purpose is not to make you feel strongly about these characters. Its purpose is to have a discussion. This one relies on you caring about these characters to be invested in the plot. They have enough overlap that I could genuinely say I can see where Orbit is coming from with these recommendations. It's not just, here's the first book that came to my mind and we'll just chuck it at the end. That's not what happened. There is clearly a thought process behind it. But I think that given the writing styles and the focal points of each story, it's not guaranteed that if you like one, you will like the other. So it depends what you're looking for in a book. If you just want a sci-fi good time, then Everina Maxwell will deliver. If you want your themes to be really heavy, then Some Desperate Glory will deliver. If you want a balance of the two, then they will both work for you. So yes and no would be my answer, which is not very helpful. But again, it entirely depends on the kind of reader that you are. They both worked for me very well, much better than Terraformers, which I only gave 3 stars. But I don't think they'd necessarily both work for everyone. It depends on what you want out of the book. But there you have it. That is the end of my sci-fi summer, the end of my Orbit recommends. Let me know if you want me to do this again sometime. I could maybe do it with a different genre. I could do it with romantasy or with fantasy or something. We'll see. But yeah, I had a great time doing these. It was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to be reading more sci-fi and getting out of my comfort zone with my genres. So that's been great. Let me know in the comments down below what was your favorite of the books that I've talked about, if any of the 4 that I've talked about, if you've read any of them and your thoughts on them. Let me know if you have read Winter's Orbit and or Ocean's Echo and your thoughts on those. Let me know if, based on my liking of this book, if you have any other recommendations for me. Leave it all in the comments down below. But that is all from me for today. So thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon.